Hannah Scott never imagined that sponsoring a festival for emerging musical talents would change her life forever. There she stood on the main stage of the Sacramento Music Festival, holding a microphone and trying not to show the nervousness she felt in front of 3,000 people. As an influencer and CEO of one of the most promising social media platforms in the country, she was used to spotlights. But that night had something different in the air. The black designer dress she had chosen especially for the occasion cost more than many cars, but at that moment it seemed like just ordinary fabric against her skin. Her fingers, adorned with diamond rings, trembled slightly as she held the microphone. Hannah took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the sweet aroma of cotton candy being sold in the festival corridors. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with immense pleasure that I present our next artist," she said, her voice echoing through the speakers scattered throughout McKinley Park. Her eyes swept over the crowd, entire families with children on shoulders, young couples embracing, groups of friends with cold beers in their hands, until they stopped on a young man backstage, holding a guitar with the same delicacy with which a sculptor holds his chisel. The stage was set up on a wide lawn, surrounded by colorful food trucks and local craft booths. LED lights created a magical atmosphere, blinking in sync with Hannah's accelerated heartbeat. The smell of fried funnel cake and craft beer competed with her imported French perfume, creating a strange but comforting mixture that took her back to her teenage years. Gregory Romano took a deep breath backstage, adjusting his guitar strings for the 5th time in 10 minutes. His hands, calloused from work at his father's electronics repair shop, contrasted with the smoothness of the instrument's polished wood. He wore a light blue dress shirt that his sister Isabella had ironed 3 times until it was perfect, and jeans that had been specially washed for the occasion. His fingers trembled slightly over the strings of the instrument that had accompanied him for years. It was the same guitar he had received from his grandfather at 15, with some wear scars and a small crack on the side that he never wanted to fix because he said it gave the sound personality. During the day, those same fingers repaired motherboards and soldered electronic components in the family shop. At night, he studied information technology at Sacramento State University, dreaming of algorithms and programming codes. But there, on that stage, he was simply a dreamer with a guitar and a voice that few truly knew. What neither of them knew was that their lives were about to intertwine in a way that would challenge everything they believed about love and destiny. Therefore, when Gregory stepped onto the stage and his eyes met Hannah's for the first time in 10 years, the world stopped. The noise of the crowd became a distant whisper. The lights dimmed, as if someone had lowered a dimmer, and for an infinite moment there were only the two of them and a decade of unspoken memories. But let's go back a little in time. Hannah and Gregory had met in their teens, in a music course she attended more out of parental obligation than passion. The Sacramento Community Music Center was located in an old building downtown, with small rooms that echoed the off-key chords of dozens of beginning students. She always arrived in her mother's BMW, dropped off by the family driver, while he came by city bus, carrying a borrowed guitar in a torn case. He, on the other hand, was there because music was his secret language with the universe. On Thursday afternoons, when the sun came through the dusty window of room 3, they shared an out-of-tune piano and discovered that their voices harmonized perfectly. She played the main melodies while he created arrangements that transformed simple songs into small works of art. For 6 months, they shared sheet music yellowed by time, spontaneous laughter that echoed through the empty corridors, and dreams that seemed too big for 2 such young people. Gregory talked about composing movie soundtracks. Hannah dreamed of being an entrepreneur, of building something grand that would mark the world. Therefore, when she left to study business administration at UC Berkeley, they promised to keep in touch through handwritten letters and weekly phone calls. Life, however, has its own plans. The letters became emails, which became sporadic messages, which eventually ceased completely. Hannah built a digital empire brick by brick, briefly married a college classmate who promised the world but delivered only disappointments, had a son who became her greatest joy and source of concern, and divorced in a process that lasted 2 years and cost a fortune in lawyers. Gregory remained in Sacramento, like a tree that puts down deep roots in the soil that saw it born. He cared for his family with the dedication of a firstborn son, worked with his father in the shop that had served the neighborhood for 3 decades, and nurtured his musical dreams on weekends, playing in small bars and corporate events that paid his university bills. But that night, destiny decided to rewrite their stories with a golden pen and ink that would never dry. "Gregory Romano, everybody," announced Hannah, and her voice trembled imperceptibly as she pronounced the name she hadn't said in so long. The word Gregory left her lips like a whispered prayer, loaded with nostalgia and recognition. She felt a shiver run down her spine, as if the universe itself was confirming that this moment was inevitable. He walked to the center of the stage with measured steps, each movement calculated to not show the earthquake happening inside him. His eyes swept the audience for a second before settling again on Hannah's face. She was more elegant, more sophisticated, with a haircut that cost more than he earned in a month, but her eyes remained the same, expressive, intelligent, with a hint of vulnerability she always tried to hide. When their eyes met again, it was as if an electric current ran through the entire festival. The audience momentarily disappeared. The lights dimmed in both their perceptions, and the noise of the crowd transformed into a distant hum. There were only the two of them, and a decade of silence that needed to be broken with the delicacy of someone unwrapping a very fragile gift. "Good evening, Sacramento," said Gregory into the microphone, but his eyes never left Hannah's face. His voice, deeper and more mature than she remembered, echoed through the festival like a sonic embrace. "This first song is for someone who taught me that music can be a bridge between hearts that life has separated." The first notes sprouted from the guitar like flowers blooming in spring, and Hannah felt her heart accelerate in a way that hadn't happened in years. The melody was new, but there was something familiar about it, as if it were an intimate conversation between them translated into chords. Therefore, when he began to sing, she realized that the shy boy she had known as a teenager had transformed into a man whose voice didn't just touch souls, but transformed them. The lyrics spoke about paths that separate but never completely forget, about people who mark our lives even when they're not present, about second chances that come disguised as coincidence. Each word seemed to have been chosen specifically for her, each breathing pause a bridge between past and present. The audience was mesmerized. Families stopped talking, couples hugged tighter, and even small children became quiet, as if they could feel the magic that hung in the air. The food trucks reduced the volume of their fryers, street vendors paused their calls, and for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, 3,000 people breathed in unison to the rhythm of Gregory's music. But what she didn't expect was that, at the end of the performance, he would come down from the stage straight toward her, passing by security as if he were a force of nature impossible to contain. His eyes never left hers as he walked, and when he finally stopped just inches away, Hannah could smell the simple soap scent he used, so different from the expensive perfume she was used to, but infinitely more comforting. With a smile that melted glaciers and a voice that carried 10 years of longing, he asked a question that would change everything. "Hannah Scott, would you like to have coffee with me after the show? We have 10 years of conversation to catch up on." She looked around, consciously aware of the curious looks, the cell phone cameras that were already recording, her assistant Marina gesticulating desperately from the side of the stage, trying to remind her of her packed schedule. But when she looked again at Gregory, at those brown eyes that had always been able to see through all her masks, only one word came from her lips: yes. The coffee turned into a walk through downtown Sacramento that extended until dawn, as if time had decided to pause to allow two souls to reconnect. They started on K Street, where a 24-hour cafe served the best espresso in the city in porcelain cups that had more history than many marriages. Hannah discovered that Gregory still lived with his parents and sister Isabella in an apartment near downtown, in a 5-story building that had been the most modern in the area in the 80s. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, with a small balcony where his mother grew herbs and a view of the park where he learned to ride a bicycle. During the day he worked at his father's shop, a man with calloused hands and a generous heart who repaired everything from old cell phones to televisions that other technicians had given up on. At night, after a quick snack prepared by his mother, always some creative combination of leftovers transformed into delicacies, Gregory grabbed his books and notebooks and ran to the university. The information technology course was demanding, with professors who required complex projects and exams that tested not only theoretical knowledge, but the ability to solve real problems. His values remained the same as she remembered from adolescence: family, honesty, and music. "You really built an empire," he said, observing her with genuine admiration as they walked down K Street. The historic buildings around them seemed like silent witnesses to their conversations, with their colonial architecture facades that bravely resisted the city's modernization. "I remember when you said you wanted to conquer the world." Hannah laughed, but there was melancholy in her eyes that he noticed immediately. It was the same look she had as a child when she discovered that something she wanted very much cost more than expected. "I conquered the world, but lost some important things along the way," she confessed, stopping in front of an old shop window displaying dusty musical instruments. "My marriage lasted only 2 years. Gabriel, my son, barely knows the real me. I'm always traveling, always connected, always busy." She told him about mornings when she woke up at 5 for recordings, about meetings that extended into the early hours, about constant trips to events where she smiled for cameras and said inspiring things she didn't always truly feel. She spoke about the apartment in an upscale neighborhood that was perfect for Instagram photos, but too cold to feel like home, about her ex-husband who had married her more for the idea of what she represented than for the person she really was. Gregory stopped walking and stared at her with that intensity she remembered from music classes, when he listened to her ideas as if they were the most important things in the world. "And are you happy?" The question caught her completely off guard. No one had asked her that in a long time. In interviews, they always talked about success, follower numbers, growth strategies. Friends asked about work or Gabriel, but never about happiness. It was as if, upon reaching a certain level of success, people automatically assumed that happiness was a natural consequence. Therefore, when she tried to answer, she realized she didn't know. Words formed and dissolved in her mind like sugar in rain. But before she could elaborate an answer that made sense, her phone rang with the characteristic urgency of nighttime calls that usually meant problems. It was Gabriel. "Mom, where are you?" "Grandma and Grandpa said you didn't come home." Her teenage son's worried voice brought her back to reality like a diver rising quickly to the surface. She could hear the television in the background and imagined Gabriel on his grandparents' couch, probably pretending he wasn't worried, but checking his phone every 5 minutes. "I'm coming, honey." "Sorry," she said, hanging up and turning to Gregory. The weight of maternal responsibility descended on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "I need to go." "Of course." He smiled understandingly, but she noticed a hint of disappointment in his eyes. "But Hannah, can I see you again?" She hesitated for a moment that seemed to last hours. Her life was complicated, full of commitments that piled up like cards in a castle about to collapse, responsibilities that demanded her constant attention. He seemed so simple, not in a derogatory sense, but in the sense that his motivations were clear, his values were solid, his life had a linearity that hers had lost long ago. But there was something in those brown eyes that made her want to say yes, something that awakened a version of herself that she had forgotten existed, a version that laughed spontaneously, that didn't calculate every word before speaking, that believed love could be simple and true. "I have an important meeting tomorrow with investors," she said, pulling a business card from her purse. The card was thick paper with gold-embossed letters that cost a fortune to print. "But maybe we could have lunch." The next day, Gregory arrived at the restaurant Hannah had chosen in Midtown, wearing his best dress shirt, a light blue piece he had bought for graduation and used only on special occasions. He spent the entire morning getting ready, asking his sister's opinion about which cologne to use, the only one he owned, and arrived 15 minutes early to make sure he got a good table. The sophisticated environment intimidated him a little, with its uniformed waiters, menus without prices, and decoration that screamed exclusivity. The tables were covered with immaculate white tablecloths. The silverware gleamed under indirect lighting, and the ambient sound was a carefully calculated mixture of soft jazz and discreet conversations. But when he saw her arriving, all insecurity disappeared like snow in the sun. She was radiant in a red blazer that contrasted perfectly with her dark hair, but he immediately noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she played with her hair, a nervous tic she'd had since adolescence. Her steps were precise, but a little stiff, as if she were playing a role instead of simply walking. "The meeting didn't go well?" he asked as soon as she sat down, even before formal greetings. It was a skill he had developed in adolescence, reading her emotions as if they were musical scores. "How do you know?" She was surprised, setting her purse aside and looking at him with genuine curiosity. "You're playing with your hair. You always did that when you were nervous in music classes," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to remember such small details after a decade. The fact that he remembered such an intimate detail touched her deeply. In her current world, people paid attention only to what they could gain from her, the contacts they could make, the opportunities that might arise. No one remembered her small habits, her quirks, her humanity. Therefore, when she began telling him about the problems with the investors, she felt strangely comfortable opening up to him. "They want me to change the entire social media strategy. They say I'm being too authentic, that I need to be more commercial," she vented, gesticulating with an intensity that made some other customers look discreetly in their direction. "But if I do that, it'll lose the essence of what I built. It'll become just another generic platform interested only in profit." She explained how she had started the platform with the idea of creating genuine connections between people, giving voice to independent creators, valuing quality content instead of just views. But the investors saw only numbers, engagement metrics, monetization potential. They wanted her to implement more aggressive algorithms, prioritize invasive advertisements, transform her creation into just another money-making machine. Gregory listened attentively, as he always did. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick solutions, just listened with the patience of someone who understands that sometimes a person just needs a safe space to process their thoughts. "Do you remember our first music class together?" he asked softly when she finished. "Of course. You played Imagine by John Lennon," she answered immediately, surprised by how easily the memory returned. She could even remember the smell of the room, the way the afternoon light came through the window, the concentrated expression on his face. "And you said I was playing it wrong because I wasn't following the sheet music exactly," he smiled, fidgeting with the cloth napkin as he spoke. "But then you admitted you liked my version. Where are you going with this? Sometimes what makes something special is exactly what differentiates it from the standard. Your authenticity is your strength, not your weakness. If you become like everyone else, why would anyone specifically choose you?" In that moment, Hannah realized she had found not just an old friend, but someone who truly saw her. Not as a brand, not as a business opportunity, not as a local celebrity, but as the person she really was, underneath all the layers of success and responsibility. But her life wasn't simple, and she knew that involving Gregory in her complexity could hurt him. He lived in a world where relationships were straightforward, where people said what they thought, where love didn't have to compete with board meetings and marketing strategies. Therefore, when he suggested they go to a small local theatre to watch an independent play, she almost said no. Her schedule was packed. She had 3 important calls to make, needed to review the investors' proposals. But something in her heart, a voice that had been silenced long ago by practicality, made her accept, and that decision would change everything. The theater was a small hidden gem in downtown Sacramento, very different from the glamorous events Hannah usually attended. The old building had been carefully restored, maintaining original elements like wooden floors that creaked softly underfoot and exposed brick walls that told stories of decades of performances. The seats were faded red velvet, but comfortable, and the small stage created an intimacy that large commercial theaters never could achieve. Gregory had specifically chosen this place because he knew she appreciated genuine art and culture, away from the spotlights of cameras and social obligations. During adolescence, she always talked about her love for theater, how the stories on stage made her feel connected to deep emotions that real life sometimes didn't allow her to explore. "How did you remember I like theater?" she asked, while admiring the framed posters of old plays that decorated the lobby. There was something nostalgic about that environment, a smell of old wood and velvet curtains that transported her to a simpler time. "You talked about it constantly in our classes. You said you wanted to be an actress before discovering that your true passion was entrepreneurship," he replied, guiding her to their seats in the 3rd row. "I remember you memorized entire monologues and recited them to me during breaks." The memory hit her like a gentle but powerful wave. She had indeed forgotten that phase, when she dreamed of going on stage and living 1,000 different lives through characters. It was before family pressure to choose a practical career, before discovering she had a talent for business, before becoming the pragmatic person she was today. The play they chose to see was Encounters and Misencounters, an independent production about a couple who reunited after years separated by circumstances that seemed bigger than them. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed by either of them, and during the first 15 minutes they exchanged complicit glances that said more than any conversation. The story followed Maria, a successful executive who returned to her hometown to resolve family issues, and John, a teacher who had never left the small city where they grew up together. Their reunion happened in a local bookstore that was about to close, and each scene revealed layers of hurt, longing, and unresolved love they had carried for years. During the first act, Hannah found herself completely absorbed by the actor's performance. There was a raw sincerity in their interpretations that made her forget she was watching a play and not eavesdropping on real conversations. Gregory, beside her, watched both the play and her reactions, noticing how her eyes filled with tears at certain scenes, how she held her breath during moments of tension. At intermission, they walked to the theater's small cafe, a cozy space with only 4 tables and an Italian espresso machine that seemed older than both of them combined. Gregory bought 2 espressos, served in white porcelain cups with gold edges worn by time. "I need to tell you something," said Hannah, nervously fidgeting with the delicate cup between her hands. The fine porcelain made her feel like she was holding something too fragile for her current world. "My family won't understand this. Us two." "Why?" he asked, although part of him already knew the answer. "Because you're real, genuine, and they're used to people who have ulterior motives," she sighed, looking through the cafe's small window at the street where ordinary people passed with their ordinary lives. "My mother will think you're interested in my money. My brother will make jokes about social differences. And Gabriel, he's at that difficult age, 15 years old, full of hormones and repressed anger. He barely talks to me beyond requests for money or complaints about rules. If he finds out I'm dating someone, he might interpret it as me trying to replace his father." She told him about the tense mornings in the apartment when Gabriel barely responded to her good mornings and left for school as if it were a prison she had created especially to torture him. About the nights when she arrived late from work and found only notes stuck on the refrigerator asking for money for this or that. Never a "Hi, Mom" or "How was your day?" The relationship with her ex-husband had ended when Gabriel was only 10 years old, an age when boys desperately need stable father figures. Since then, she had focused so much on building financial security for both of them that maybe she had neglected building emotional intimacy. Gregory gently held her hand, his fingers calloused from work, contrasting with the softness of her skin. "Hannah, we're not doing anything wrong. We're two adults rediscovering a friendship." "Is that all it is? A friendship?" she asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that he had never heard before. It was the voice of the 17-year-old girl hiding underneath the 32-year-old woman, the part of her that still believed in happy endings and true love. The question hung between them like a sustained musical note, loaded with possibilities and fears. Gregory opened his mouth to respond, but before he could form the words, the bell rang, indicating the end of intermission. Both stood up in silence, saving the question to be answered later. During the second act of the play, they were more aware of each other than of the performance on stage. When their hands accidentally touched on the armrest, neither pulled away. The touch was electric but comforting, like finding a favorite song after years without hearing it. The play culminated with Maria and John deciding to try again, despite all the complications their different worlds brought. When the curtains closed, the audience burst into enthusiastic applause, but Hannah and Gregory remained silent, processing the obvious similarities between fiction and their own lives. After the show, Gregory took her to see a special place, a small hill on the outskirts of Sacramento, accessible by a dirt trail that wound between eucalyptus and pine trees. It was where he went to think and play guitar when life got too heavy or when he needed to make important decisions. "This is where I come when I need to find myself," he said, taking a plaid blanket from his used Corolla's trunk. The fabric was soft from use, obviously washed hundreds of times, but clean and smelling of the simple fabric softener his mother used. They settled on top of the hill, where the view extended over the entire city. Sacramento spread before them like a sea of twinkling lights, each illuminated window representing a life, a story, a set of dreams and challenges. The sky was starry, a rarity in the city, and the crescent moon provided enough illumination for them to see each other's faces. "It's beautiful," murmured Hannah, sitting beside him on the blanket. "When was the last time I looked at the stars?" She tried to remember and realized she couldn't. Her life had become a succession of ceilings, from the apartment to the car, from the car to the office, from the office to events in closed halls. When had been the last time she had really stopped to observe the night sky? "I don't remember you being so reflective before. At 17, I thought I had all the answers. I knew exactly what I wanted, how to get it, and when I would have everything figured out." She laughed sadly. "Today, at 32, I realize I don't know anything about what really matters. I have success, money, recognition, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night wondering if this is really what I wanted." Gregory took the guitar from the car and began playing softly. The melody echoed across the empty hill, mixing with the distant sound of traffic and the crickets beginning their nocturnal symphony. It was a song he had composed himself during lonely nights when he missed something he couldn't name. Until now. "Who did you write this song for?" she asked, closing her eyes and letting herself be carried away by the melancholic but hopeful melody. "For a girl I met 10 years ago and never managed to forget," he replied simply, his words floating in the night air like flower petals carried by the wind. Hannah's heart accelerated like an engine being started after months of being idle. Each beat was a drum announcing something she had forgotten was possible to feel. Therefore, when he stopped playing and turned to look at her, the air between them became charged with unexplored possibilities, unspoken words, decades of what-if that finally found their opportunity. "Gregory, You don't need to say anything now," He interrupted gently, putting the guitar away with careful movements. I know your life is complicated. I know I'm different from the world you live in. But I also know there's something between us that never died. It just hibernated, waiting for the right moment to awaken. At that moment, as if the universe had a cruel sense of timing, Hannah's phone rang with the insistence of a siren. The name Mom flashed on the screen, and she knew ignoring it wasn't an option. Her mother, Christine Scott, CEO of a natural cosmetics company and a woman who considered punctuality a cardinal virtue, didn't call after 10 at night, unless there was an emergency. Hannah, where are you? You missed the family dinner we scheduled weeks ago. Her mother's voice carried that tone of controlled disappointment she had perfected over the years. Reality hit her like a bucket of ice water. The dinner. How had she forgotten? It was the mandatory monthly Scott family meeting, where they discussed business, planned social events, and maintained appearances of a united and successful family. I need to go, she said, getting up quickly and shaking the blanket with abrupt movements that betrayed her internal agitation. My family is worried. Of course, he said, but there was disappointment in his voice that he tried to mask with understanding. On the way back, the silence between them spoke louder than any words. The car radio played soft music, but the volume was too low to disguise the weight of unspoken things. Hannah looked out the window, watching the city pass like a slow-motion movie, while Gregory drove with the concentration of someone trying not to think too much. She knew she was at an emotional crossroads that would require a definitive decision. She could return to her safe and predictable life, with its established routines, clear responsibilities, and superficial but uncomplicated relationships. Or she could risk her heart once more, open herself to the possibility that true love hadn't died with her adolescence. But when Gregory stopped in front of the electronic gate of her gated community, a surprise awaited them. Gabriel was planted at the security booth like a teenage bodyguard, wearing a Golden State Warriors t-shirt and an expression that mixed concern with irritation. "Mom, where were you? And who is he?" asked the boy, crossing his thin arms over his chest in a pose intended to be intimidating, but only revealed his age. The moment Hannah most feared had arrived. Her son, her greatest concern and responsibility, was face to face with the man who was stirring her heart in ways she didn't even imagine were possible. How to explain without sounding like an irresponsible teenager? How to protect Gabriel from the possibility of another disappointment if things didn't work out? The encounter between Gabriel and Gregory was tense like a guitar string about to snap. The 15-year-old looked at the man beside his mother with a mixture of curiosity, hostility, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. Hannah found herself in the middle of the two, feeling torn between protecting her son from another possible disappointment and not hurting Gregory, who clearly hadn't expected this situation. The entrance hall of the gated community, with its gleaming marble and expensive floral arrangements, suddenly seemed too small to contain the tension hanging in the air. The night security guard pretended to be busy with important papers, but Hannah could feel his curious eyes observing the scene that would certainly become elevator gossip for the next few days. "Gabriel, this is Gregory, an old friend," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, while internally calculating all the possible ways the situation could explode in her hands. Her purse felt too heavy on her shoulders, and she realized she was gripping her keys so tightly they were leaving marks on her palm. "Old friend who appears out of nowhere and disappears with my mum all night," Gabriel retorted, crossing his thin arms over his chest. His eyes, so similar to hers, shone with an intelligence that sometimes surprised her and other times scared her. Gabriel had grown up too fast, forced to mature when his parents divorced. At 10 years old, he had become the man of the house out of necessity, developing a sense of protection toward his mother that sometimes bordered on possessive. He had seen Hannah cry hidden after tense calls with lawyers, had witnessed nights when she stayed up working until dawn to avoid thinking about loneliness. Gregory stepped forward, and Hannah held her breath. She expected him to defend himself, to try to justify his presence or minimize the situation. Instead, he did something that completely surprised her. "You're right to be worried about your mother. I would do the same thing in your place," said Gregory, his voice carrying a sincerity that was impossible to fake. The response surprised Gabriel, who had prepared a battery of arguments for any lame excuse the man might offer. His eyebrows rose slightly, and he tilted his head to the side as he did when something intrigued him. "Really? Of course. You're the man of the house, aren't you? It's your responsibility to take care of her," Gregory continued, and Hannah realized the wisdom in his approach. He was talking to Gabriel as an equal, recognizing his premature maturity instead of treating him like a child bothering the adults. "Exactly." Gabriel straightened up, seeming to grow a few inches. Adults rarely recognized the role he had assumed in the family, and even more rarely did someone praise his dedication to his mother. "And you? What do you want with her?" asked the boy, his voice gaining a gravity that didn't match his age, but perfectly reflected his legitimate concerns. "Gabriel!" Hannah reprimanded him, feeling her cheeks flush, but Gregory made a gesture indicating it was okay, that he could handle the question. "I want to get to know her again. We knew each other when we were younger, and now we want to be friends again." "But I won't do anything that makes you uncomfortable," Gregory replied, maintaining direct eye contact with the teenager. It was a conversation between men, and both knew it. Gabriel studied him for a moment that seemed to last hours. His eyes, inherited from his mother, were too perceptive for his age. "Do you play guitar?" "I do. My mom used to play too. She stopped after my dad left," said Gabriel, and his words fell in the hall like stones in a silent lake. Hannah felt her heart squeeze painfully. She didn't know Gabriel had noticed that he had connected the abandonment of her passion for music with the end of the marriage. For years, she had kept the guitar in the closet, covered by clothes she never wore, as if hiding the instrument could also hide the pain. Music had been her way of processing emotions when words weren't enough. After the divorce, every time she played, the melodies came out too melancholic, loaded with a sadness she didn't want Gabriel to perceive. So, gradually, she stopped playing. First, only on difficult days, then on weekends, until silence became permanent. "Maybe she'll start playing again," said Gregory gently, his voice carrying a promise he hadn't verbalized, but both understood. "Music is like riding a bicycle. You never completely forget." Gabriel nodded slowly, as if processing important information. "You seem cool," he finally admitted, surprising everyone present, including himself. That night, after Gabriel went up to the apartment on the 12th floor, Hannah and Gregory stayed talking in the community's Japanese garden. The space had been designed by a famous landscaper with strategically positioned stones, a small fountain that murmured constantly, and indirect lighting that created soft shadows among the plants. "You were incredible with him," she said, sitting on a wooden bench that was partially hidden among bamboo. "Gabriel doesn't usually accept new people easily. Since the divorce, he's developed a natural distrust of any man who approaches me. He's just protecting you." "I can't blame him for that," Gregory replied, sitting beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "How old was he when you separated?" 10. "A terrible age to go through that," Hannah sighed. "Carlos, my ex-husband, promised he would keep in touch, that he would be a present father even living in another city. During the first months, he called religiously. Then the calls became sporadic. Now Gabriel is lucky if he gets a birthday card." She told him about the nights when she found Gabriel looking at his phone, waiting for a call that didn't come. About weekends that were planned and cancelled at the last minute due to the father's work commitments, about how her son had gradually stopped mentioning his father, building walls around his expectations to avoid getting hurt again. "Gregory, I need to be honest with you. My life is controlled chaos. I have a company to manage, investors who question every decision I make, a teenage son going through the most complicated phase of life, a family that will question every move I make. I don't know if I can have a relationship right now." "Who said anything about a relationship?" He smiled, and there was something comforting in his lightness. How about we start slowly? Dinners when you have time, conversations when you need someone to listen, music when you want to reconnect with that part of yourself you put in the closet. The proposal was tempting in its simplicity. There was no pressure, no heavy expectations, just the possibility of rediscovering a friendship that had meant a lot to both of them. But the universe, as always, had other plans. The next day, a Wednesday that had started with promises of being routine, Hannah's life was turned upside down. She discovered when her assistant Marina called her at 7 in the morning with the altered voice of someone who had spent the night awake, monitoring social media. "Hannah, you need to see this." A photo of you with Gregory was published on a local gossip blog, and it's being shared on all networks, said Marina, her voice carrying that urgency that usually preceded image crises. The photo had been taken at the theater, probably by someone in the audience who recognized Hannah and decided the information would be worth some clicks. It wasn't compromising in the traditional sense, but it clearly showed the intimacy between them. Gregory appeared holding her hand during intermission, and both seemed absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. The article's headline was sensationalist. "Social media millionaire has new romance with unknown musician." The text speculated about social differences, questioned Gregory's intentions, and even included an unauthorized biography of him that had clearly been hastily researched. "Damn," murmured Hannah, feeling her stomach contract as she read the comments. Some followers supported her, saying she deserved to be happy. Others questioned whether she was lowering herself, or if Gregory was only interested in her money. There were even comments about Gabriel, speculating about how he was dealing with the situation. Therefore, when Gregory called minutes later, she already knew what he was going to say. His voice sounded tense, loaded with a guilt that wasn't his, but which he had assumed anyway. "I saw the article," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't imagine that going to see a play could become news." "It's not your fault," she interrupted him, looking through her 20th floor office window. The city stretched below her, millions of people living their private lives without having to worry about hidden photographers or malicious speculation. This is how it works when you're a public figure. Anything becomes news, especially if it involves romance. "Will this affect you professionally?" The question she feared most. "I don't know. Maybe. My image has always been of a strong and independent woman who focuses on business. Romance isn't part of my personal brand." There was a pause that was too long, loaded with painful understandings. "I understand," he said finally, and there was a resignation in his voice that broke her heart. "Gregory, don't—" "No, it's okay. I really understand. You have much more to lose than I do. Your reputation, your business, Gabriel's stability. I'm just an electronics technician who plays guitar on weekends." But before she could respond, before she could explain that it wasn't what she meant to say, he hung up. The sound of the dead phone echoed in her office like an omen of loneliness. That afternoon, Hannah had a tense meeting with her marketing team in her conference room, a modern space with a glass table that reflected the worried expressions of everyone present. Some thought the romance could humanize her and attract more followers, especially women who would identify with her search for true love. Others feared it might harm her business credibility, making her seem distracted or less focused. "We need to control the narrative," said Robert, her marketing director, gesturing toward the data projection on the wall. "If we're going with this story, it has to be on our terms." "Or we could deny everything," suggested Marina. "Say they're just friends, that the photo was taken out of context." "What do you want to do?" asked her partner and friend Claudia, the only person in the room who had known Hannah long enough to notice the internal war she was fighting. "I don't know," admitted Hannah, words that rarely came from her mouth in professional contexts. "For the first time in years, I don't know what to do." Meanwhile, Gregory was at home, trying to concentrate on a burnt motherboard that had arrived that morning, but his mind was completely with Hannah. His father's shop, normally a refuge where he could find peace through technical precision, felt claustrophobic. Each electronic component he soldered reminded him of how different their lives were, of how she lived in a world of numbers in millions, while he worried about bills in hundreds. His sister Isabella entered the shop carrying 2 glasses of orange juice and a determined expression he knew well. At 18, Isabella was the most direct person he knew, incapable of pretending or speaking in half words. "I saw the photo online," she said without beating around the bush, handing him one of the glasses. "She's beautiful." "She is," he murmured without looking up from the workbench. But our worlds are very different, Bella. She's right to worry. Any relationship of hers becomes headlines. Any mistake of mine could harm the career she built over years." Isabella crossed her arms and stared at him with the severity of someone much older. "The brother I know never gave up on anything he really wanted. I remember when you spent 6 months learning that impossible song on guitar just because you heard it on the radio and fell in love with the melody. This is different, is it? You're in love with her, aren't you?" The question caught him off guard. In love. He had considered attraction, nostalgia, curiosity about what could have been. But love. His mind went back to the previous night, to the way his heart had accelerated when she smiled, to how he felt complete for the first time in years when he was beside her. "Maybe," he admitted, "then fight for it. Life is too short to give up on things that matter because of what others will think." That night, Gregory played at the bar where he did his weekend shows, a small establishment downtown that served an eclectic clientele of university students, local artists, and professionals who wanted to relax after stressful days. The audience was larger than normal, probably curious to see the influencer's boyfriend, as he had read in some online comments. But when he began to sing, he did something he hadn't planned. He dedicated a song to someone who taught me that love is worth any risk. The song was new, composed that afternoon in a moment of painful inspiration. It spoke about finding someone who makes you want to be better, about love that transcends social differences, about the courage needed to fight for what really matters. When he finished, the bar fell silent for a few seconds before exploding in applause. Some people even cried, touched by the raw sincerity of his performance. But Gregory barely noticed the audience's reaction. He was thinking about Hannah, wondering if she was watching, if she would understand the message. The song reached Hannah through a video someone posted online. She was at home, in her private office, trying to work on an important proposal when Gabriel entered without knocking, something he only did when something really bothered him. "Mom, you need to see this," he said, showing his phone with a serious expression that made her immediately abandon her laptop. When she saw Gregory singing with his eyes closed and an expression of pain and hope mixed together, she knew she had a decision to make. The song was clearly for her, each word a love letter sung for the whole world to hear. His voice broke slightly in the chorus, and she realized he was suffering as much as she was. "He really likes you," said Gabriel softly, sitting in the chair next to the desk. "How do you know? Nobody sings like that unless they're truly in love. And look, Mum, I know you're scared, but I also know you haven't smiled right in years. Since you met him, you seem, I don't know, more like yourself." Gabriel's observation hit her like lightning. Her 15-year-old son had noticed things she hadn't even perceived herself. But the decision she would make next would surprise everyone, including herself. Hannah spent 3 days avoiding Gregory's calls and hiding behind work like a soldier behind trenches. She cancelled external meetings, worked late on reports that could have waited, and dove so deep into corporate routine that she almost managed to convince herself that the last few days had been just an elaborate dream. But on Wednesday, during a morning that seemed ordinary like all others, she received an unexpected visit that would change everything. Gabriel appeared in her office during school hours, wearing his navy blue uniform and a determined expression she rarely saw. "Shouldn't you be in math class?" she asked, looking up from the documents spread across her desk. Her work desk was too organized, a clear sign she was trying to control at least one area of her life. "I got a medical excuse," he said, sitting in the chair in front of her desk without being invited. "Mom, We need to talk about Gregory. Gabriel, Let me talk first, he interrupted with a maturity that sometimes scared her. I know you're scared. Hannah looked at him surprised. Gabriel rarely talked about emotions so directly, preferring to communicate through gestures, silences, and occasional adolescent explosions. Seeing him there, talking like an adult about complex feelings, made her realize how much he had grown without her noticing completely. Scared of what? She asked, although she knew exactly what he was talking about. Of getting hurt again. I remember when you and Dad separated. You cried a lot, even when you thought I wasn't seeing, continued Gabriel, playing with the strap of his school backpack. I heard you crying in the shower, in the car when you thought I was distracted with video games, sometimes even at work when I called and your voice was strange. Hannah's eyes filled with tears she fought to contain. She had tried so hard to protect Gabriel from her own pain, to maintain a facade of strength during the difficult months after the divorce. Discovering that he had noticed everything, that he had carried this concern alone, broke her heart. Gabriel, and since then you've never brought anyone home again, never talked about going out with someone, never smiled that way you smiled that night you came home with him, said the boy, his eyes shining with a perception that went far beyond his 15 years. Hannah realized that Gabriel had become her silent protector, observing her moods, monitoring her happiness like an emotional thermometer. The responsibility he had voluntarily assumed was too heavy for such young shoulders. You're scared of getting hurt again? I understand, but I'm also scared you'll be alone forever, he said, and his voice trembled slightly. I'm scared that when I leave home for college, you'll just be working and pretending you're okay when you're not. Gabriel, he seems cool, Mom. Not like those disgusting businessmen who hover around you at events, interested only in what they can gain. He looks at you like you're really important, not just because of money or fame. Gabriel's words echoed through the office like bells ringing at the right time. That afternoon, after a long and honest conversation with her son about fears, hopes, and the complexity of adult relationships, Hannah made a decision that would shock everyone who knew her. She cancelled all meetings for the rest of the week, ignored 3 calls from investors, and drove to Gregory's father's shop in her white BMW. The contrast between her car and the simple neighborhood where the shop was located was striking, but for the first time in years, she didn't care about appearances. She found him working on a smartphone with a cracked screen, completely concentrated on the delicate task of replacing the display. His hands moved with surgical precision, and there was something hypnotic about the way his fingers manipulated the small electronic components. He didn't see her enter, too absorbed in his work. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice echoed in the small shop like thunder on a clear day. Gregory looked up, surprised and clearly uncomfortable. "Hannah, what are you doing here?" He looked tired, with dark circles that suggested poorly slept nights, and his work clothes were stained with solder and electronic dust. He was so different from the elegant and well-dressed men in her social circle, but there was something in the honesty of his appearance that attracted her more than any Italian suit. "I came to apologize and make a crazy proposal," she said, noticing how the other people in the shop, Gregory's father and 2 employees, stopped working to observe discreetly. They went outside to talk in the small garden behind the shop, a simple space with some white plastic chairs and a guava tree that shaded the place. The noise of the city arrived muffled, creating a bubble of privacy amid urban chaos. Hannah took a deep breath, mentally organizing the words she had rehearsed during the entire trip there. "You were right when you said there's something between us that never died, and I was wrong when I said I couldn't have a relationship right now." "Hannah, let me finish," she said, raising her hand to silence him gently. "I've spent the last 10 years building an image of a strong woman who doesn't need anyone. I've posted thousands of posts about female independence, empowerment, individual success. But the truth is, I'm strong enough to admit I want someone special in my life. I want you." The words came out like a confession whispered in church, loaded with vulnerability and courage in equal measures. She had spent her entire life calculating every public move, every word that could be misinterpreted, every image she posted. For the first time, she was speaking only with her heart. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher whether she was serious or if it was some kind of cruel dream. "And your career? The exposure? The malicious comments online? I'll deal with that. I have an excellent team, and at the end of the day, if my followers can't accept that I have a right to happiness, then they're not the audience I want anyway," she said, discovering she really believed her own words. "And Gabriel? Gabriel was the one who made me realize I was being a coward," she smiled, remembering the morning's conversation. "He approved of you. He said you make me smile for real, and that he hadn't seen that in years." Gregory approached her slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might flee at any moment. "Are you sure? Because once we start this, it won't be easy. Your life is public, complicated. They'll question my motives, speculate about our differences, turn every encounter of ours into headlines. And yours is simple and genuine. Maybe that's exactly what I need," she said, touching his face with a delicacy that contrasted with the determination in her voice. "Gregory, Before she could finish the sentence, he kissed her. It was a soft kiss at first, hesitant, as if testing whether it was real. But when she responded, when her hands got lost in his hair and she allowed herself to melt in his arms, the kiss deepened, loaded with 10 years of longing and the promise of a future that finally seemed possible. When they separated, both were breathless, and Hannah smiled, the first genuine smile in days. "So do you want to date a problematic influencer with a teenage son and a crazy family?" "As long as she wants to date an electronics technician who plays guitar on weekends and has a talking parrot named Danger," he replied, caressing her face. "You have a parrot," she laughed, a crystalline laugh that echoed through the small garden. "Did I forget to mention? He imitates my voice and always interrupts my important calls. Isabella says he has more personality than most people we know." Hannah laughed again, and it was the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. But the real test was still to come. That night, she would do something she had never done. Bring Gregory to dinner with her family at the penthouse where her parents lived in Sacramento's most exclusive neighborhood. Her parents, Christine and Edward Scott, were accustomed to a high social standard that included successful businessmen, influential politicians, and renowned artists. The idea of their daughter showing up with an electronics technician who lived with his parents would certainly cause, at minimum, some raised eyebrows. Her brother Thomas, a 30-year-old artist who was considered the family's black sheep for refusing to follow the business tradition, would certainly make ironic comments. And her mother, CEO of a natural cosmetics company she had built from scratch, would question his intentions with the subtlety of a police interrogation. Therefore, when they rang the doorbell of the penthouse at 8 o'clock, Hannah in a conservative navy blue dress and Gregory in his best suit, borrowed from his father, she squeezed his hand tightly. "Remember, be yourself. If they don't like it, that's their problem," she murmured, while they waited at the carved mahogany door. "Easy to say," he murmured back, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. But when the door opened and revealed Christine Scott, an elegant 55-year-old lady with the same smile as Hannah and eyes that missed little, Gregory knew that regardless of what happened, it would be worth fighting for this love. The dinner was a delicate dance of questions disguised as courtesy and answers measured with precision. Edward, a retired but still imposing man, questioned Gregory about his professional plans with the intensity of a corporate interviewer. Christine observed every movement, every word, as if evaluating a risky investment. Thomas, surprisingly, was the one who broke the tension. "Finally someone normal in this family," he declared, toasting with his wineglass. "At least he has an honest profession." "Thomas!" reprimanded Christine, but there was an amused glint in her eyes. "What? I prefer 1,000 times a man who works with his hands to those suit-wearing businessmen who only know how to talk about numbers and don't have an interesting conversation," continued Thomas, clearly enjoying the general discomfort. That's when Gregory surprised everyone. Instead of being defensive or trying to impress, he began asking questions about Christine's cosmetics business, about Thomas's works, about Edward's retirement plans. He showed genuine interest in their lives, transforming an interrogation into a conversation. "Have you been playing since you were little?" asked Christine, when the subject of music came up naturally. "Since I was 10. My grandfather taught me the first chords before he died. He always said music was the universal language," Gregory replied, and there was a sincerity in his voice that was impossible to fake. "Hannah used to play too," said Edward. "She stopped after a few years." The silence that followed was loaded with understanding. Everyone knew she had stopped after the divorce, but no one had ever spoken about it openly. "Maybe she'll start playing again," said Gregory softly, echoing the words he had said to Gabriel. "Music has a way of coming back to us when we're ready." At the end of the night, when they were saying goodbye at the door, Christine held Gregory's arm. "Take good care of my daughter," she said, and there was both a request and a threat in her words. "I intend to take good care of the whole family," he replied, and she knew he was serious. 3 months passed, like an emotional roller coaster of first official dates, introductions to friends, and the gradual process of joining 2 completely different lives. Hannah discovered that Gregory woke up at 5 in the morning to run before work, that he insisted on having dinner with his family every night, and that he had the adorable habit of singing in the shower, always off-key on purpose to make Isabella laugh. Gregory discovered that Hannah worked better with classical music in the background, that she had an impressive collection of old vinyl records stored in her closet, and that her strong personality hid a vulnerability she only showed to very special people. Gabriel, initially cautious, gradually opened up to Gregory. They started playing video games together on weekends. Then Gregory taught him some basic guitar chords, and eventually Gabriel began to see him as a father figure who never tried to replace his dad, but rather occupy his own space in his life. The media continued speculating, but Hannah learned to navigate the exposure more easily. She posted occasional photos of them together, always accompanied by messages about authenticity and the importance of choosing happiness over social expectations. Her followers gradually began supporting the relationship, especially when they noticed how much happier and more relaxed she seemed. But the real test came when Gregory was invited to play at a major tech company's anniversary, an event where Hannah would be one of the main speakers. It would be the first time they appeared together officially at a business event, mixing their professional worlds. The night was a success. Gregory played an acoustic set that impressed executives accustomed to expensive but soulless entertainment. Hannah gave a lecture about innovation and authenticity that received a standing ovation. When they finished, they walked hand in hand through the hall, and Hannah realized she was no longer trying to hide anything. "I can't believe we managed it," she murmured, as they danced to a slow song at the end of the night. "Managed what?" "This, us. Making it work despite everything." "Who said it was difficult?" He smiled, spinning her delicately. "The hard part was finding you again. The rest is just living." 6 months after reuniting, they were establishing new rituals and traditions. Sunday dinners at Gregory's parents' house, where Hannah learned to make the family's famous lasagna. Saturday mornings at her parents' ranch, where Gregory met Silver the poodle and fell in love with the collection of rescued animals she maintained. Gabriel had flourished under the positive influence of having a stable male figure in his life. His grades improved, he smiled more, and he even started bringing friends home, something he hadn't done since his parents' divorce. Isabella, who initially viewed Hannah with suspicion, gradually became her biggest fan. "My brother has never been so happy," she confided during a girls' lunch that Hannah had proposed. But what really sealed their fate was a simple Thursday night, 6 months after the reunion. Hannah arrived home stressed after a particularly difficult day of tense meetings and complicated decisions. She found Gregory in the kitchen, preparing dinner while singing softly a song she didn't recognize. "Rough day?" he asked without even looking back. He already knew her moods by the sound of her steps. "Horrible," she sighed, hugging him from behind and resting her face against his back. "Sometimes I wonder if all this pressure is worth it. Want to talk about it?" "Actually, I just want to stay here hugging you and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist." "I can arrange that," he said, turning off the stove and turning in her arms. "Dinner can wait." They sat on the couch, her nestled in his arms, and Gregory began playing guitar softly. There was nothing extraordinary about the moment, just two people who loved each other, sharing an ordinary night in an extraordinary way. "You know what I discovered?" she said, closing her eyes and letting the music envelop her. "What?" "That happiness isn't a destination. It's a choice we make every day. And I choose you every day, even when I leave socks scattered on the floor," he joked. "Especially when you leave socks scattered on the floor," she laughed. "Because that means you're here, that this is real, that it's not just an elaborate dream." That night, after Gabriel went to sleep, they stayed up late talking about future plans, shared dreams, and the strange feeling that their lives were finally in the right place. Hannah had rediscovered her passion for music, playing again on quiet nights at home. Gregory was considering opening his own shop, with the financial and business support she offered not as charity, but as an investment in his talent. But the real turning point came when Gregory made a decision that would surprise everyone, especially Hannah. He had spent weeks planning, conspiring with Gabriel and Isabella, and even asking advice from Christine and Edward. What he was about to do would change everything once again. Epilogue. A year and a half after that first reunion at the Sacramento Music Festival, Hannah was once again on the stage of the same event, but this time the circumstances were completely different. The festival had grown exponentially, attracting national artists and thousands of visitors from across the state. She was there as a sponsor, but as the extremely proud girlfriend of the headliner who was about to take the stage. Gregory had been invited to be the event's main act after his first independent album reached the top of the American independent music charts. Success had happened organically. His songs about true love, authenticity, and the beauty of simple life resonated with a generation tired of superficiality. The irony wasn't lost. She had inadvertently helped boost his career just by being who she was, but his talent had sustained the success. The audience was impressive. More than 8,000 people spread across McKinley Park, entire families camping in beach chairs, young couples dancing on the grass, groups of friends sharing local craft beers. The stage had been expanded and the production rivaled any national event, but the festival's essence remained the same, celebrating new talents and authentic music. Backstage, Hannah adjusted Gregory's guitar for the last time, a ritual they had developed over the months. It was the same instrument he had played with at that first reunion, but now it was accompanied by professional equipment and a full band that included Isabella on keyboards. His sister had proven to be a talented musician, postponing college for a year to explore this newly discovered passion. "Nervous?" asked Hannah, observing how his hands remained steady while tuning the strings. "I always get nervous before playing, but this time is different," he admitted, looking at her with an intensity that made her realize there was something special in his plans for that night. "Different how? You'll see." He smiled mysteriously, kissing her forehead before walking toward the stage. In the audience, a VIP section had been reserved for the combined family they had formed over the months. Gabriel was there, now 16 and too proud to publicly admit how much he admired Gregory, but clearly excited to be backstage at such an important event. Beside him, Christine and Edward chatted animatedly with Gregory's parents, an unlikely but genuine friendship that had developed between two couples from completely different backgrounds. Thomas had brought his new girlfriend, an art teacher, who had helped him organize his first solo exhibition, an event that Hannah had helped finance and promote. Even Isabella had invited some friends from college, forming an eclectic group that represented all ages and social classes. When Gregory took the stage, the ovation was deafening. He had become a local celebrity, but maintained the same humility and authenticity that had always characterized him. He wore a light blue dress shirt, the same color as that first shirt he had worn to lunch at the restaurant, and dark jeans that Isabella had chosen especially for the occasion. "Good evening, Sacramento," he said into the microphone, and his voice echoed through the park like a warm greeting between old friends. "It's incredible to be here again, in the place where it all began." He started the show with songs from the album, each one received with growing enthusiasm by the audience that sang along to lyrics they had memorized. There were songs about family, about pursuing dreams without losing values, about finding love in unexpected places. But it was when he reached the acoustic part of the show that the magic really happened. "A year and a half ago, I met an extraordinary woman on this same stage," he said, his eyes searching for Hannah backstage. "A woman who taught me that true love has nothing to do with social status or money, but rather with finding someone who accepts all your flaws and still chooses to stay." In the audience, Hannah felt her eyes fill with tears. She knew he was talking about her, but hearing those words declared publicly to thousands of people still moved her deeply. Gabriel, beside his grandparents, rolled his eyes dramatically but smiled, clearly proud of his mother. "This next song," continued Gregory, "was written for Hannah Scott, the woman who invested in culture and harvested a love that will last forever." When he began to play, Hannah immediately recognized the melody. It was the same one he had played on the hill months ago, but now it had complete lyrics and arrangements that transformed the intimate song into a public declaration of love. Each word seemed to have been written especially for her, each breathing pause, a bridge between the past and the future they were building together. The song spoke about second chances, about people who enter our lives at the right time, about love that grows slowly but becomes unshakable. When he reached the last chorus, something extraordinary happened. Gregory stopped singing and pointed to the backstage, gesturing for Hannah to come up on stage. She hesitated for a moment. She wasn't prepared for that, didn't know what he had in mind. But when she saw Gabriel waving encouragingly from the audience and Isabella smiling radiantly from the keyboard, she knew she needed to trust him once more. Walking to the center of the stage under deafening applause, Hannah felt transported back to that first night when their encounter had changed everything. But now, instead of nervousness, she felt only gratitude for having had the courage to choose love over convenience. Gregory stopped the music and turned to her, still holding the guitar, but with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of nervousness, determination, and pure love that made her realize what was about to happen. "Hannah," he said into the microphone, but his eyes were fixed only on her. "You taught me that life is too short to waste time pretending to be someone we're not. You showed me that true love is about choosing someone every day, even when it's difficult, even when the world questions that choice." He handed the guitar to Isabella, and under the watchful gaze of 8,000 people, knelt in the center of the stage. The entire park fell into absolute silence, as if everyone was holding their breath simultaneously. "So, Hannah Scott," he said, taking a small velvet box from his pocket, "will you marry me? Do you want to build a life together, with all the complications and joys that might bring?" The box contained a simple but elegant ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a blue topaz stone that perfectly matched the dress she had chosen to wear that night. It was delicate, unique, exactly the type of ring she would choose for herself if she had to decide. Hannah looked at the audience, where she could see Gabriel standing, shouting, "Say yes, Mom," while Christine cried discreetly in Edward's arms. Thomas held his camera, documenting the moment, while Gregory's parents hugged each other, emotional. But when she looked again at Gregory, kneeling before her with his heart in his hands and 8,000 witnesses, only one word managed to come from her lips: yes. The park exploded in celebration. Fireworks that had been secretly prepared lit up the sky. Isabella began playing Canon in D on the keyboard, and the audience spontaneously sang congratulations. Gregory placed the ring on her finger with trembling hands of emotion, and when he kissed her, hundreds of cell phone cameras captured the moment that would go viral on social media within hours. But for Hannah and Gregory in that moment, there were only the two of them and a promise of a future that finally seemed solid and real. In the months following the engagement, they planned a wedding that perfectly reflected who they were, an intimate ceremony at Hannah's parents' ranch with 200 guests that included family, close friends, and some of the people who had worked with them over the years. Gabriel was the best man, proud and emotional, to finally have a complete family again. Danger the parrot, of course, interrupted the vows by shouting, "Marry me," at the most solemn moment, making everyone laugh and confirming that from then on, their lives would be a beautiful and chaotic symphony of love, music, family, and the little surprises that make life truly extraordinary. The honeymoon was to Tuscany, where they visited small wineries, played guitar in ancient squares, and Hannah rediscovered the joy of traveling without corporate agenda or professional commitments. It was just her and Gregory, exploring the world together like the dreamers they had always been. When they returned to Sacramento, they found a new house they had bought together, not an ostentatious mansion, but a cozy residence in a family neighborhood, with a large garden where they could receive their expanded family and a music studio where Gregory could compose, and Hannah could finally return to playing seriously. Gabriel adapted to the new family configuration with the flexibility typical of resilient teenagers. He had his own room decorated exactly as he wanted, a family that had dinner together every night, and two adults who loved him unconditionally without competing for his attention. Isabella got a scholarship to study music at a renowned university, but decided to stay based in Sacramento to continue playing with Gregory on weekends. The sibling duo became a small local sensation, playing at events and festivals throughout the region. Hannah achieved what seemed impossible, balancing a successful career with a happy personal life. Her company continued growing, but she implemented policies that allowed more flexibility and time for family. She discovered that being happy in her personal life made her more creative and efficient professionally. And when, 2 years after the wedding, she discovered she was pregnant at 35, she knew her life had become exactly what she had always dreamed of, but never dared imagine possible: complete. The child, a girl they called Melody, to honor the music that had brought them together, was born on a spring morning, surrounded by a family that welcomed her as the cherry on top of a love story that had proven that second chances can be even better than first ones. Gabriel, now 18 and about to enter college, surprised everyone by choosing to study psychology, saying he wanted to help families like his reconnect. "You showed me that families don't need to be perfect to be happy," he explained. "They just need to truly love each other." And when Hannah held Melody in her arms, while Gregory played a lullaby he had composed especially for his daughter, she knew she had made the right choice at every crucial moment. She had invested in culture hoping to promote new talents, but ended up harvesting a love that transformed not only her life, but created a family that was much bigger and more beautiful than anything she had imagined possible. Danger the parrot, now officially considered a family member, learned to say "beautiful Melody" and became Sacramento's most photographed pet, appearing regularly on Hannah's social media as proof that happiness can be found in life's simplest and most unexpected details. And so, a story that began with an investment in culture became the most beautiful love story Sacramento had witnessed in decades, proving that sometimes the best return on an investment cannot be measured in money, but rather in the depth of love we harvest when we have the courage to open our hearts to the infinite possibilities that life offers.